A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version. Vicissitudes of fate. He suffered from fever for a few days. His relatives and friends had been around him during the last days of his life, heads down in solemn mourning. They wanted to hear his last will, but he didn't want to give up just yet. However, he'd already lost his last battle. The mighty Emir Timur ibn Taragay Barlaz died from an unknown illness near Utra on the 17th day of Shaban, effulgent month of 807. He developed pneumonia and died from this illness during the campaign. Apparently, some unknown poison was used. Maybe it was a type of poison that doesn't get into the system through drinks, but becomes dangerous when gets in contact with some physical items. Rumors had it that perhaps the Chinese were afraid that he would conquer China. According to the official version, the great commander died from a common cold before he started the great campaign. Was it due to the vicissitudes of fate? Had somebody planned it? Who was buried in the tomb of Tamerlane? Strangeness and contradictions, mysticism and coincidences followed him during his whole life and didn't leave him even after death. Chapter 1. Death Ward. Otrar and Turkestan were his footholds, and a part of his troops spent winter there. He was master of his own destiny. He wasn't superstitious. Having said that, he had astrologists and psychics at the court, but he believed them only if they predicted success. This time it was the same. Timur the Lame started his last campaign in December 1404. It was a properly prepared, full-scale military invasion, and it promised a good trophy. China was the last country which did not submit and was not afraid of him. Chinese ambassadors, following their traditions, treated him as a servant. It is natural that Timur was annoyed by these facts and wanted to conquer China. According to medieval historians, Tamerlane raised a 200,000-man army. On his orders, a route was mapped out, and roads, as well as country's resources and cities he was going to pass through, were described in that plan. 500 carriages were loaded with felt tents and provisions, and thousands of milking mares followed the army of many thousands. Timur left Samarkand. The winter was severe. He crossed the Sirdarya River on ice, as the river was frozen that year. As a rule, both nomads and settlers never expected that an enemy could attack in winter. A medieval historian wrote that nature's elements had been against him. Violent tempests and fierce blizzards hit his soldiers, and as a result, many of them died. They got stuck in a howling blizzard, and it was so freezing that Timur's chain armor could break. The merciless wind threw snow in their faces, not letting them breathe and blinding the warriors. If a person exhaled, his breath froze on his beard and moustache, and their saliva froze too. A part of Timur's soldiers died. Winter killed both the young and the old. Their ears and noses were frozen. In spite of this, Timur did not pay attention to death and did not regret about what had happened. He had to stay in Otrar in order to check the troops' readiness and prepare them. After this, he planned to say goodbye to his relatives, family and children, leave them there and move forward. Timur was stubborn. Nevertheless, destiny itself interfered with the plans of the indomitable but elderly commander. He fell ill during campaign. This is always dangerous for a 70-year-old person. Chapter 2. Cup from the hands of death.
На этом месте
Timur built a luxury mosque here. A 20-meter deep well is in the middle of the square. The mosque is on the left, and the palace where Timur supposedly died is on the right. On the 14th of January, Wednesday, Timur, together with princesses and other courtiers who accompanied him during the campaign, stayed in the palace of Berdibek, which was one of his generals. And then an accident took place. It is surprising that on the day when they arrived, a fire started in the attic chimney in the palace, which was the seat of the monarch. The fire was immediately extinguished, but the courtiers were perturbed by this occurrence because on that day people had nightmares and were sad and frightened, thinking that disaster had struck them. However, it was difficult to frighten Timur by omens and ill health. He had his own way to deal with problems. It was decided to have a feast in the palace. Perhaps he tried to cure and warm himself. The historians of that time and contemporaries wrote that he had died from illness and too much wine he had drunk. However, it is known that he never drank much, so this information was doubtful.
Это, конечно же, вызывает вот такие вот сомнения.
According to his contemporary Ibn Arab Shah, he ordered his servants to prepare an alcohol tincture for him and then drank it excessively. He stopped asking about his troops, did not want to hear to anybody's entreaties, and finally he received the cup from death's hands. This vodka affected Timur's intestine and liver. His body started shaking and hands and legs got weaker. Healers were brought in. It was freezing cold outside and they put some ice on his stomach and forehead and started treating him. 3 nights later, Timur started preparing to go to the house of humiliation and punishment. His liver was torn to pieces on the day when neither wealth nor sons could help him. He coughed up blood and bit his hands because he was aware of his helplessness. Medical treatment might have brought him closer to death. Timur suffered from pain. His cries and curses were heard in the palace for a few days. Then he called his relatives and courtiers and told them that he would die within 2 days. He chose an air and gave orders for everybody to not cry or mourn. The storm was raging outside and the wind was moaning during the last minutes of his life. It has always been typical of people to attribute some mystical phenomena, mysteries, secrets and uncertainty to great people. My refuge is by the throne of God, who gives and takes away life when he wishes to. I entrust you to his mercy and goodness. You must not cry or lament when I die, because it will be useless. Has anybody ever managed to avoid death just crying? Everybody was in despair. They didn't know whether to continue the campaign or not, as well as if they should announce that the emir had died or not. It was decided to conceal the death of Tamerlane from everybody. They prohibited wearing sables. The body was embalmed, shrouded and put into a coffin made of ebony. The body was secretly sent to Samarkand at night under the guise of taking one of the princesses there. However, when the body was brought to Samarkand, it was already known about Timur's death there. Presumably, he was secretly buried in Guri Amir Mausoleum at night. Today, we should finally find out where Tamerlane was buried. And why doesn't the date of Timur's death match the date shown in the chronicles and on the tomb? Chapter 3. Life after death. Timur was well built, tall, he had high forehead, large head, and he was strong and brave. His healthy complexion made his white face livelier. He had wide shoulders, thin fingers and strong muscles. He wore long beard. His right arm and legs were wounded in battle. His gaze was quite gentle. He His contemporaries described the death of the great and unconquerable in details. However, the reason for his sudden illness remains unknown. According to the most popular version, he caught a cold when crossing the Sirdarya River. However, it is possible that he had already been seriously ill when he started the campaign in Samarkand, but concealed his illness. There is also a legend according to which Amir Timur was poisoned, and it is said that they even knew what poison he was given. His skull cap was impregnated with aconite. Even nowadays, it is difficult for doctors to say immediately that a person was poisoned with Jungarian aconite, because the symptoms are quite specific. There's a version that China was afraid of him because he was a great conqueror. According to another version, there was a competition between his descendants. We know from history of Timurid dynasty that its representatives were quite cruel to each other. However, Tamerlane was over the age of 70, his health was declining and he looked like a decrepit old man. Thus, any cold could be fatal for him. His contemporaries said that at advanced age he could hardly lift his eyelids and speak. They described him as an old man.
Они все как бы это описывают и изображают пожилого старого человека.
Tamerlane's curse is a widely known story. However, despite the warning, his tomb was broken open and wars started. Was it a coincidence? In July 1941, the remains were extracted and studied properly by anthropologist Gerasimov. Another oddity occurred again. According to his research, he was not such a decrepit old man. Although they said that he was tall, the height of his skeleton was only 172 centimeters. Judging from the physical condition, he looked like a 50-year-old man. But he died at an older age. Therefore, there are some contradictions. As for his appearance, Timur had a lot of portraits in spite of Muslim prohibitions. There were portraits of Timur during battles, meetings and feasts on the walls of his palaces. Both foreign and local artists painted him, but none of the lifetime portraits have remained. Perhaps they were destroyed. The reconstruction by Gerasimov is considered the most famous image. Did Tamerlane really look like that image? It demonstrates rather European features, although it is known that Tamerlane was descended from Turkic Barlas kin. Epilogue, or the beginning of a new story. The version is rather incredible, however. What if Tamerlane was not buried in Guri Amir? Instead of him, there could be someone who simply looked like him, and the warning was written just in case. Maybe the resting place of the commander hasn't been found. Before the Soviet expedition was undertaken, 3 places were mentioned. They were Kesh, where he had been born, Samarkand and Otra. Perhaps the tomb of the bloodthirsty commander is somewhere in Otra.
Я думаю, что навряд ли
It is unlikely that such a figure was buried where he had died. He was a kind of conqueror for Otra. History can show various things. However, I think that it can be easily verified using DNA tests. So it can be verified because his grandson Ulugh and his son were buried next to him. However, various anthropological data coincide with the chronicle. He was lame because he had been wounded by an arrow. The Soviet anthropologist had no doubts, but he had received an order from Stalin, who was very interested in Tamerlane and would not be satisfied with the answer that it was not Timur. Only Gerasimov and his laboratories studied remains of Tamerlane. If remains of him and his descendants buried next to him are studied properly, completely different information will be made available. But maybe we shouldn't disturb the remains of cruel Timur. This world does not deserve the pain I feel in my heart. Should we stay in this world just for the sake of a little bleak hill? Why should we run in different directions for the sake of such a short-lasting matter as life?